At 0917 local time, the Australian P-8 Poseidon leveled out at 21,000 feet, its long gray fuselage slicing through clean, blue air south of the Paracel Islands. Inside the cockpit, everything felt routine. The aircraft had been airborne for hours, following a precise reconnaissance racetrack over international waters, engines humming at a steady cruise, sensors quietly doing what they had done countless times before. This was familiar territory, legally and operationally, and the crew knew the pattern by heart. For 2 hours, nothing unusual happened. Radar contacts came and went. The electronic environment remained mostly quiet. The Poseidon's crew rotated through checklists and instrument scans with practiced ease. It was the kind of mission that lulled you into thinking it would end the same way it began, uneventfully. Then Beijing decided to send a message. 10 seconds after the first warning tone chirped through the cockpit, the sky ahead of them exploded into motion. A dark shape punched through the thin cloud layer directly in front of the Poseidon, twin engines blazing in full afterburner. The Su-35 closed at nearly the speed of sound, crossing the P-8's nose at barely 600 feet. It was so close that the Australians could see the pilot's helmet turn, visor glinting as he looked straight at them. At a combined closure rate of 994 miles per hour, the difference between a calculated intercept and a fatal collision had been less than half a second. The shock came immediately after. Wake turbulence slammed into the Poseidon like an invisible fist. 190,000 pounds of aircraft rolled violently left as the autopilot disconnected with a sharp chime and the stick shaker rattled to life. The pilots hauled the controls back, muscles tensing as they fought to keep the aircraft upright. The engines coughed as disrupted airflow rippled through the intakes, a momentary stumble that reminded everyone on board how fragile stability could be. Then the electronic support measures panel lit up. A focused X-band fire control radar beam locked onto the Poseidon, drilling into it with concentrated energy. The BARS-R radar, one of the most powerful fighter radars ever fielded, was no longer searching. It was staring. Unlike surveillance radars that sweep wide arcs, this beam was narrow and deliberate, the difference between shining a flashlight across a room and pointing a laser at a single forehead. The Chinese pilot believed this was intimidation. The Australians thought it felt like Christmas morning. Along the Poseidon's fuselage, the small bumps and bulges that most people ignored suddenly became the most important components on the aircraft. They housed the AN/ALQ-240 Electronic Support Measures Suite, a system designed to vacuum up every electromagnetic whisper within range. The instant the BARS-R touched them, the system woke fully, cataloging frequencies, pulse repetition intervals, scan modes, power outputs. Data that China and Russia had spent decades protecting began streaming in real time through an encrypted satellite link, flowing directly to Australian intelligence analysts thousands of miles away. The pilot re-engaged the autopilot, steadied the aircraft at 21,000 feet, maintained a heading of 095, and keyed the radio with a calm voice that betrayed nothing of the turbulence they had just endured. This is an Australian military aircraft conducting lawful operations in international airspace. By the time the transmission ended, the Su-35 was already turning back for another pass. The Chinese pilot probably believed he was delivering a warning. He was, just not the one Beijing intended. The fighter reappeared off the Poseidon's left wing, materializing as if it owned the sky. This time there was no dramatic head-on rush. The Su-35 eased into position a mere 130 feet away, matching speed at 440 knots. It was classic close formation shadowing, the kind that looked dominant in cockpit videos and propaganda reels. What it really was a private air show. Below the Poseidon's nose, the MX-20 HD electro-optical turret pivoted smoothly and locked on. The high-definition camera system could read license plates from 25,000 feet. Now it recorded at maximum resolution, capturing every weapons pylon, every panel seam, every maintenance access port. The infrared channel overlaid the image with heat maps, painting the fighter in thermal gradients. Engine exhaust at 1200 degrees, avionics bays glowing at 180, faint, warm lines tracing hydraulic runs beneath the skin. This information would one day tell Australian engineers exactly where future weapons should aim. The Su-35 began demonstrating its thrust vectoring capability. The exhaust nozzles pivoted subtly, deflecting up to 20 degrees in any direction, making constant micro-adjustments. The technology allowed the fighter to generate control forces independent of airspeed, letting it sit rock-steady in turbulent air where conventional aircraft struggled. It was impressive engineering. It was also being completely documented. Sensor operators logged every nozzle movement, every deflection angle, every response time. Patterns emerged in real time. In a future fight, Australian electronic warfare systems would know precisely how the aircraft stabilized itself and exactly how to interfere with that process. From 130 feet away, the danger was obvious. A sudden maneuver by the Poseidon could sweep its 123-foot wingspan straight into the fighter. The Su-35, with 62,000 pounds of thrust, could dart away in milliseconds. The Poseidon, built on an airliner frame, would need precious seconds just to begin a turn. Then the Chinese pilot made a critical error. He positioned himself perfectly for the MX-20 HD to photograph his entire weapons load in exquisite detail. Two R-77 radar-guided missiles hung on the inboard pylons. Two R-73 heat seekers perched on the wingtips. The configuration was captured, labeled, time-stamped, and transmitted to fleet intelligence before the fighter even finished settling into position. The Su-35 rocked its wings left and right, the international signal for "Follow me." When the Poseidon held course, the fighter flicked its vertical stabilizers, sending jet wash across the patrol plane's nose. It was a petty escalation that accomplished nothing, except logging precise flight control response times into Australian databases. "Maintain course," the pilot said quietly. "He wants us to react. Let him perform." The Chinese pilot operated under a fundamental misunderstanding. He believed proximity equaled dominance, that aggression meant control. What he failed to grasp was that every second spent showing off was another second of intelligence collection. In minutes, the Poseidon had gathered more real-world data on Su-35 flight behavior than analysts had assembled in years. The fighter suddenly pitched up, climbing 500 feet above them, then rolled inverted. Whatever came next, the cameras were ready. The Su-35 hung upside down directly over the Poseidon for 2 full seconds. 42,000 pounds of aircraft suspended by thrust vectoring and computer control, fuel and weapons fighting gravity, while the flight computer solved physics equations hundreds of times per second to avoid catastrophe. It was genuinely impressive flying. It was also genuinely stupid. At 440 knots, the maneuver defied conventional aerodynamics. Too slow for traditional control surfaces, too fast for anything resembling rotary wing flight. Thrust vectoring made it possible through brute force and mathematics. Australian analysts had theorized about this envelope for years. Now they had high-definition proof. The fighter rolled into a perfect barrel roll around the Poseidon, carving an invisible cylinder in the sky. As it passed over the tail, the gap shrank to 65 feet. Tail cameras captured individual rivet lines on the Su-35's belly. One miscalculation would have sheared the Poseidon's tail clean off. Every moment was recorded. Roll rate, altitude deviation, energy loss during the inverted segment, recovery dynamics. Beijing charged billions for this aircraft. Australia had just received its operating manual for free. As the Su-35 rolled level off the right side, its wake struck the Poseidon like a body blow. The patrol plane bucked violently, nose pitching up 8 degrees as rolling vortices battered the control surfaces. Autopilot disconnected again. Airspeed fluctuated 40 knots in 2 seconds. In the cargo bay, operators grabbed their consoles as equipment slammed to the deck. They lost 1,800 feet in the recovery. The number 2 engine suffered a brief compressor stall. FADEC logic detected the disruption and restored combustion automatically. The auxiliary system stabilized the aircraft. Sudden, violent, but manageable. The Chinese pilot likely felt satisfied watching them struggle. He never realized the satellite data link had been transmitting continuously. The Su-35 dropped below them during the recovery. Moments later, the tactical coordinator spotted it climbing back toward them on scope. But instead of sliding into formation, it accelerated ahead. This time, it was setting a trap. The fighter climbed to 1,000 feet ahead and slammed its throttles to idle. Airspeed collapsed from 440 knots to 250 in 4 seconds. To the Poseidon's crew, it looked like a sports car locking its brakes in front of a semi-truck. Closure rate spiked to 190 knots. At that speed, they had 12 seconds. The Poseidon's throttles came back hard, but turbofans obeyed different physics. 10,000-pound rotating masses of titanium took precious seconds to spool down. Meanwhile, the distance vanished at 318 feet per second. Traffic, traffic, traffic! The collision warning system filled the cockpit with synthetic urgency. The Chinese pilot believed he had engineered the perfect dilemma. Climb, and the Poseidon would stall. Dive, and it would accelerate into him. Turn, and its wings would sweep through his position. The only option was to slow and pray. 8 seconds. 5. The gap stabilized at 5,000 feet, but they were still overtaking. The stick shaker pulsed as the margin above stall shrank to 30 knots. What the Chinese pilot didn't factor in was that his entire deceleration profile was being recorded. Engine spool down time, minimum controllable airspeed, throttle response curves. He was teaching Australian tacticians exactly how to force an Su-35 into an energy trap. Just before collision became inevitable, the fighter roared back to power, accelerating and diving beneath them with 130 feet to spare. Jet wash followed instantly, invisible rivers of 400-degree exhaust slamming into the Poseidon. The number 1 engine flamed out completely. A fire warning illuminated as FADEC logic fought to restore combustion. The crew transitioned to single-engine procedures without hesitation. Serious, but not critical. The Su-35 climbed again, reappearing barely 330 feet ahead. This time, something new glowed on the sensor displays. The fighter's countermeasure dispensers were armed. The UV-26 system spun up, not pointed away from a threat, but aligned directly with the Poseidon's flight path. The geometry was deliberate. At this distance, the Australians could see everything: flare dispensers under the fuselage, chaff pods, even the pilot's hand reaching for the panel. Flares released here would funnel straight into the Poseidon's engines. The Chinese pilot believed he was about to force a retreat. What he was actually about to do was give away one of his most closely guarded secrets. Infrared sensors recalibrated instantly. The ALQ-240 prepared to capture ignition signatures. Recording parameters jumped to high-speed capture. "Brace for impact," the pilot announced. "Prepare for possible engine failure." No one powered down a single sensor. The final radio threat crackled across the frequency. The Poseidon held course. Then the Su-35's belly erupted. 48 flares cascaded outward, each a 3,600-degree sphere of burning magnesium. A wall of fire 60 feet wide and 100 feet tall bloomed in front of the patrol aircraft. The sensors captured everything. Then the debris hit. The cockpit flashed white as optical systems overloaded. Burning particles peppered the nose and radome. Pitot tubes went chaotic as superheated air distorted readings. The smell of hot metal seeped into the cabin. The number 2 engine ingested fragments and stalled instantly. FADEC cut fuel and attempted restart. Magnesium kept disrupting airflow. The already damaged #1 engine vibrated violently as molten particles warped fan blades. Airspeed bled away. 280, 270, 260. The stick shaker rattled continuously. The pilot pushed the nose down, trading altitude for life. "Mayday, mayday, mayday," the tactical coordinator transmitted calmly. Even as he spoke, he confirmed data integrity. The satellite uplink was green. Everything that mattered was already safe. The #2 engine finally relit at 70% power. The #1 stabilized at 40. Enough. The Su-35 peeled away and vanished. 4 hours later, the Poseidon limped into Darwin, wounded but airborne. 6 weeks of repairs would follow. Within 24 hours, the intelligence had spread across the Five Eyes network. Beijing had sent a fighter to deliver a message. Australia received it loud and clear.